Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're recording on, the Wurundjeri Willam clan and Tongarong people, and give our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We encourage everyone listening to consider the traditional owners of the land they're living and thriving on, and consider the benefits that may come from a treaty with the First Peoples. This is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land.
Kate Hood is an award-winning actor, director and disability arts advocate with a career spanning more than 3 decades. For over 20 years, she worked extensively in Australian theatre, film, television and voiceover, including credits with Melbourne Theatre Company, Adelaide State Theatre Company, and productions like Pygmalion, Hotel Sorrento, Blue Healers and Prisoner. After becoming a wheelchair user, Kate launched a second chapter of her career, this time as a disabled artist and change maker. She has written and performed her own work, directed for major festivals, and narrated award-winning audiobooks. Her play Ruthie was developed with support from Writers Victoria. As a passionate advocate for disability representation in the arts, Kate has served on the board of Arts Access Victoria, co-chaired the Performance with Disabilities Committee, and was Deputy Chair of Equity's Diversity Committee for 7 years. Kate is the founder and artistic director of Raspberry Ripple, a professional theatre company dedicated to inclusive storytelling and collaboration between disabled and non-disabled artists. Kate's recent credits include Cost of Living, Escaped Alone, Takeover, and The Real and Imagined History of the Elephant Man. Kate also recently served as Artistic Associate at Melbourne Theatre Company. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Nicole. How are you going?
Good. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
That is such an impressive bio. Can we go all the way back to the start?
Yes.
What brought you into the arts and performing specifically?
I think the thing that really brought me into it was seeing a play when I was about 7 years old, and I saw a play called Smugglers Beware at New Theatre in Sydney, where I was brought up. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do, to be on stage, to be an actor. And so I ended up leaving school pretty early. I left school when I was 15 because I knew what I wanted to do. So I moved to New Zealand, went to drama school over there. I worked with the Mercury Theatre in Auckland for 5 or 6 years, something like that. And then came back to Australia, and the rest is history, basically. It's all in the bio that you talked about. But I've got to say that when I became disabled in 2007 and became a wheelchair user, that there was immediately the sound of shutting doors in my face. And since then, I've been fighting the idea that just because a person has a disability does not mean that they can't act, that they can't work in theatre or television or whatever a jobbing actor might do. And so there's a very big conversation that needs to be happening with drama schools like NIDA and WAPA and VCA in Australia about what they have in place to provide access for people with disabilities who want to audition for those courses. So I don't know what you think about that, Nicole, but I think it's a really important thing that people with disabilities have access to exactly the same pathways as everybody else, as people without disabilities. I think it's crucial. And I think it's crucial for the development of the industry as well.
Are you finding that people misunderstand and think that inclusion means more roles about disability? Are you finding that people conflate the two?
Yes, absolutely. What I'm finding at the moment, having done cost of living last year, And I did it at Sydney Theatre Company and Brisbane Theatre, Queensland Theatre, I should say. And Priscilla Jackman directed it, and she's probably one of the top directors in Australia, I would say. And also Dan Dorr, which was fantastic because Dan is a disabled actor and he also acted in the show. It was really wonderful to have him in the room during rehearsals. But back to your question, yes, I think that what people see is, the capability of a person with a disability is only to play the role of a person with a disability. And I don't see that because out there in the world, we are mothers, we are fathers, we are siblings, we are neighbours, we are prisoners, we are dentists and doctors and nurses, and we are teachers, we are songwriters, we are all of the above. So I can't see why we can't be cast in those roles.
In terms of when you developed your disability, if that's the right term.
Acquired, I suppose, is the right one.
Acquired. When you acquired your disability, did you have the thought that maybe you should do something else, or was there never a question and you were going to continue acting?
Oh, absolutely. I got the message very loud and clear that I was not going to have my career. Very loud and clear. And in fact, I never expected to be on stage again. After years and years of nothing in that area happening for me, except the work that I created for myself, I did not expect to be doing a play in the mainstream again. So my story is that I went and studied psychotherapy because I wanted to do something which was aligned to performance. And basically, being an actor is understanding the human condition. That's what you've got to do. So I thought psychotherapy was fairly closely aligned to that. And I thought that I would be a counsellor for people with acquired disability because there is none. There was none for me. The experience of becoming disabled is the experience of not having what other non-disabled people have. And I've got one foot in both worlds. I understand what that is. And so I feel I'm uniquely placed to add to the industry and talk about this stuff.
Do you find that having one foot in both worlds presents its own set of challenges? It's harder for people to put you into a box, so to speak?
Definitely. It definitely does. But I should finish what I was saying before, because in the studying of psychotherapy, of course, you work on yourself. And doing work on myself, I realised that what I really wanted was to retain my chosen profession. So I decided that I was going to come back and I was going to advocate for people with disability, for artists with disability, to be seen on mainstream stages and television and film. And I'm still doing that. I'm still saying the same things that I said back in about 2011, something like that. So I've been going for quite a long time talking about this with people, with other professionals I've always known in the industry. But the resounding thing that I experience as a person with an acquired disability is that now that I'm a wheelchair user, people don't think I can play anything but a wheelchair user. And I find that really strange. And I think that creative people like directors and producers and people in the mainstream need to do some thinking about that. I think that really people don't know what to do with me. That's what I think.
I get the sense that, and I'd love to hear your comments on this, that if people have an inclusive cast or an inclusive theatre group, that they feel like they're doing the right thing and they almost give themselves a pat on the back rather than it just being the norm that some people have disabilities.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are circumstances where a production will be mounted about, say, an autistic person, and that production will be directed and played by non-autistic people. And so it's not made accessible for autistic audiences to come and see the show. That kind of thing I find disgraceful.
So what would be this, I'm sure, could be a whole podcast series of its own, but what would be something that you would say is one of the biggest misconceptions that the mainstream theatre company or just performance in general have about including somebody with a disability?
Basically, what the industry really expects from people with disability is that they are going to fit in to a structure which has already been made and which doesn't necessarily suit them. Actually, what we're talking about, and I think that the crucial thing that has to happen is that people need to stop making assumptions about people with disability not being able to fit in, but the people who teach at drama schools and educational institutions for the arts need to actually do their homework, and they need to get educated about disability and accept that they are not the experts in that. They have expertise maybe in voice or in movement. For example, I've had a person who teaches movement come to me and say, "Hey, Kate, I like to start my classes with skipping. And how would I include a person in a wheelchair in skipping?" And my response to that was to say, well, why don't you ask the person in the wheelchair? Because we've got our own version, right? We know what our bodies are capable of. Also, why does this person want to start the class with skipping in the first place? Is it because it's a group activity? Or is it because they want everybody's heartbeat to be raised? Like going for a run would raise a heartbeat? Is that what they want? Because if that's what they want to achieve, well, then maybe the person in the wheelchair doesn't have to actually skip, but maybe the person in the wheelchair needs to go really fast. If they're in a manual chair, for example, maybe the person in the wheelchair is actually able to weight bear, and maybe that person can do sit to stands while everybody else is skipping. You know, it's a creative thing that people need to talk through. And you know, they're saying nothing about us without us. Well, I think that teachers need to adopt that sentiment when dealing with people with disabilities, students with disabilities. But I think at the moment, they are focusing on people with invisible disabilities because that's easier for them to deal with. A worry I've got about that is that every person with a disability is going to have access needs, right? So a person who is neurodivergent, for example, is going to have certain access needs. I want to make sure that those access needs are met and that we have a standard which includes people providing an access rider to somewhere like a drama school or a theatre or a television station or whatever, and that access rider is understood by the people who have to work with the disabled person.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just want to get your comments on one thing that I've been trying to work through in my own mind, which is, on one hand, we're saying ask us what we need.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, some people have a problem with constantly educating or being seen as the person that's going to educate able-bodied people about what they need.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficult balance between, like, we shouldn't always have to educate people, but then if we do, that's okay as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a really difficult one because people don't know. For example, when I was doing cost of living, I was on tour with 3 wheelchairs. I had a wheelchair for the show, a wheelchair for my personal use, and a wheelchair to travel with. There were 3 in my dressing room every night. Of course, things break down and need fixing. And there was one night where my show chair just wasn't working. And so I had to go on with my personal chair. But it's about, for me as an experienced actor, I'm thinking about the dramaturgy of disability and the dramaturgical choice I made about the chair I wanted to use on stage. We need to have those conversations as well, because what I mean by dramaturgy is that the actor needs to make choices around the character they're playing and around the wheelchair they're using, for example, or other aid they're using, as it affects the character, not necessarily as it affects them, but as it affects the character. And the director of the show needs to come on board to have conversations about that. But people are a little frightened to do that at the moment. They're really scared of using the wrong language, offending someone, saying the wrong thing. And I think that we've got to, I often find myself being very generous with people, overly generous with people, when I should not have to be really. But that's where we are right now.
I made a medical appointment the other day, and on the phone I asked them about access because I'd never been to that medical clinic before. They were asking me questions about whether or not I could get out of the chair that were just practical questions, but then they fell over themselves trying to be so apologetic, saying, I'm sorry that I asked that question. And it was almost like they were embarrassed that they had to ask.
Yep.
And I was spending my energy reassuring them and saying, these are important things for you to know in order to give me the right information.
Correct, yeah. It is so annoying, isn't it? Oh, my God.
It's just like people are embarrassed to ask questions.
Yeah. They're afraid of getting it wrong and being sued and all that kind of stuff. But I've had the experience of being in hospital, for example, and a doctor coming around with a gaggle of medical students and describing me as wheelchair bound to those students. And I put my hand up and said, excuse me, I'm a wheelchair user. I'm not wheelchair bound. And that is the wrong terminology for you to be using as a medical professional.
Bound sounds like you're like strapped into a chair, unable to get out, like almost like a prisoner.
Correct. My logic goes like this. My wheelchair frees me. It doesn't bind me. It allows me to get out there, out the door and into life. It allows me to do the things that I do. It allows me to perform on stage. It allows me all of the freedoms that everybody else has, But of course, I still can't get into every shop or every building. I still can't have a cup of tea with my mates if they're able-bodied and they live in a house which has got steps, for example, or something like that. So we have an enormous amount of work to do just in being able to live in an ableist world as a person with a disability. It's intense.
You sound like you adapted to being a wheelchair user quite well. Was that always the case, or did you make a decision?
I think it took me probably about 10 years after diagnosis, after becoming a wheelchair user, to actually be comfortable in my own skin and say, well, this is it. This is what I've got. And that's the thing that we've all got to do, right? We've got to say, well, this is my life. But that doesn't mean that I'm incapable of doing anything. I mean, I don't know about you, Nick, but I'm patronised by people all the time. And I find that really unacceptable. And there are things that I really arc up about. I'm not kind to people in certain situations. I just tell them what I feel about things,
I found that I was never a swearer until a couple of years ago. And now if I get patronized, I just work out a way to put a curse word into conversation,
Yeah.
that kind of shocks people out of the patronizing.
Yes. I mean, I maintain really firmly, actually, that in Australia, we've got people who adhere to the charity model of disability very much. And that's across the board. This is the model that says we've got to feel sorry for those people and be nice to them, you know. And I find that disgusting. I really do. Because I don't want to be pitied. I want to be considered a part of the human race. And that is, after all, what we are.
We've talked a lot on this throughout this podcast series that I'm doing about people educating themselves as to what good inclusion looks like. Do you have an example of a performance or a theatre performance, I guess, where you thought this is how it should be done?
Yes, I do actually, because I did a very long development for a show, and the very lengthy development included the director and the producer of the show making sure that I had everything I needed. So I could actually make myself a cup of tea in a break, or I could easily get in. I could use the toilet easily. And I actually forgot that I was disabled. I actually forgot. That was a really great moment for me because I had to leave that show in order to do cost of living, and we had a big meeting. You know, what are we going to do here? We need to replace what Kate is doing. We need to get somebody in to play her, possibly. And a non-disabled person put her hand up to do it. And I actually said yes and went, oh, hang on a minute. It's got to be a wheelchair user. It can't be you. It's got to be a wheelchair user. And so ultimately what we did was we hired Mia Boonen, who is a wheelchair using actor, and she played me. And I recorded my bits and they put them on film, and they made a show which included footage and live acting, and, you know, it was all wonderful. It worked really well. That's my example. Because I believe that, you know, when access is provided for people, they should actually not feel disabled. That is, the lack of access is what causes disability and not our bodies.
The social model.
100%, yeah.
Could you tell me about founding Raspberry Ripple?
Ah, yes. Well, I founded Raspberry Ripple because I looked around me and I saw that there were some companies like Back to Back in Victoria. That's an amazing company, and it's got an amazing director and philosophy, and it employs disabled artists as actors and so on. But the company is run by a non-disabled person. And I could not see anywhere around me a company that was run by a disabled leader, a disabled artist, disabled artistic director. And I had done a course with Joe Berent, who came over here from the UK. And in doing that course, we talked about leadership styles and what leadership was. And I thought, okay, I'm experienced in this area of theatre making. I think I'm going to form a company which is disability-led, basically. I'm going to lead it, and I'm going to use disabled and non-disabled artists in this company because we share the world. We breathe the same air all the time. It's common for us to be together. But in my company, what I like to do is to make work from the point of view of disability, but use non-disabled people as well.
That's interesting because I often feel like having just a disabled company or having just a disabled theatre group or something is its own form of segregation.
Yes, that's right. I hate that. I really hate the siloing that goes on, the separation between disability and non-disabled people. I think it's contrary to what we want to see. it certainly is contrary to what I want to see. I want to see everybody together all the time. I want to see disabled writers in writing rooms. I want to see a disabled person actor on Neighbours. I want to see disabled directors in theatre. I want to see all that.
In a lot of ways, it's frustrating that we're still having this fight and these conversations. Are you finding that it's getting better and the response to Raspberry Ripple is more positive?
Yes, it is getting better, but very slowly. I'm still saying the same things that I was saying very long time ago. Change takes time. Absolutely. And the idea of including disabled artists in the making of work really puts the cat amongst the pigeons for some people. It really does. We're still talking about drama schools training artists with disabilities, students with disabilities, and agents taking actors with disabilities on, and producers thinking about that. And it should be just normal as far as I'm concerned.
What keeps you going? What makes you think it's your fight to have?
Everything I do, absolutely everything. My acting, my directing, my writing is all in order that the next generation of disabled artists has an easier time of it than I did. Everything that I do is for them.
As somebody that does improvised theatre, I just want to say thank you for everything you're saying, because it is making a difference even if you can't see it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. I mean, I think it slowly catch a monkey. It's that. And I think that we need to have the same things in place for us as everybody else has. It's not okay that we don't. That's what I would say.
From my own experience of living with a disability and then working in a disability organization, sometimes I get home and I'm just like, I want to talk about anything else other than disability. So then if you put advocacy on top of that, it becomes a lot. Are there ever times when you want to break?
Oh, look, I watch Netflix, or I go out with friends, or I do something for myself, completely for myself. I'm very excited at the moment because I'm about to get a dog, and that is going to be absolutely fantastic for me, because I'm going to get out and about in the community, and the dog is going to be a service dog and it's going to help me. I'm getting older. I'm in my 60s. So, I need to have some help around the place. It's kind of heartbreaking to me that I know what I'm missing out on in my life. When I became a wheelchair user, I realised that I was going to go without things. My partner left. I have a completely different set of friends than the set of friends I used to have. Some turned their backs on me. This stuff happens, and it happens to people when they get cancer as well. It's not only disability, but we need to articulate it. We need to put it on stage. And that's why I formed Raspberry Ripple, to tell those stories.
So what sort of achievements has Raspberry Ripple had? I mean, it sounds like you're doing great work. Are there points that you can point to and say, this is why I keep going, this means it's working?
I can say that I've worked with some young able-bodied actors, and I've done a work which was called That Old Thing, which was about sexuality and disability, and a non-disabled person choosing to be a partnership with a disabled person and bringing that person to their old friends, to a dinner party, and their friends going, ooh, how do we deal with this, basically? And I did this work in an improvised kind of fashion so that it was different every night. Everybody learned something from it, including me, because it was about what is okay for everybody and what is not okay for everybody. And somebody came to see that and said that it was the best thing they'd ever seen because it made them think about love and sexuality in a different way completely. That means a lot to me, a lot.
Often when we have disabilities, we're seen as like the brains trust for all disabilities and that we'll have the answer for access for everything.
Yeah.
Is there something you've learned or something that surprised you through this work that you realized that you didn't know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had the revelation that, in fact, I know an awful lot about wheelchairs, but I have no idea what it is to be autistic or what it is to be blind or what it is to be deaf. I don't know. So I, along with everybody else, have to ask really blunt questions of people when I'm working with them. And so, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable, what do people disclose, what do they not disclose, what is my choice, what is their choice? These are all very interesting questions to me. I think that we have many, many questions that need answering.
What would you say to people that think that it's all too hard and they don't know enough to deal with disability? What would you say to those people? Because a lot of people say, well, educate yourself, but that's like something that's very abstract. So what would you say that people should do if their mind is in the right place and they want to do the right thing and be more inclusive? What would
Yep.
you say they should do?
I would say to those people, remember that we are all different. Remember that a wheelchair user is not the same as another wheelchair user. And I would say to them, take a risk, ask the unaskable question. And if the disabled person in front of you doesn't want to answer it, they'll tell you. And then you can have a conversation with them about why they don't want to answer that question. And you will learn something and they will learn something. I really believe that we've got to go to some uncomfortable places together in order to resolve certain issues in the entertainment industry. We've got to do it. I mean, as an actor, disabled actor, I disclose because I'm not embarrassed about my condition. I don't see it as something which I've got to hide. Let's face it, when I have a costume made for me, they need to take my measurements. They need to touch me. And that's fine in the context of getting fitted for a costume. It's absolutely fine. It's not fine not to talk about it. That is not fine. If there's a bubble left around things which are unsaid, that causes harm to people. And I would say don't do it. Plunge in and say, I'm sorry, I might be making a mistake here, but I need to ask you X.
I think in general, if a question is coming from a good place, question's always a good thing.
Absolutely. I would take being given a costume as an example. I had to say to the costume people at Melbourne Theatre Company, for example, when I was fitted for a costume, I can weight bear, actually. So if there's a railing in the dressing room, I can stand up and you can see what these trousers look like on me. And also, if you touch me when you're taking measurements or something like that, that is completely fine with me. We each have our own boundaries, right, about what we will and won't do. And I think that's fine. I think people need to know what those boundaries are. But they also need to know that, hey, every person you deal with is different. Every person's going to have made different choices about disclosing or not disclosing, and that's fine. All they need to know is what our access needs are. They don't need to know the whole story.
In a lot of these podcast episodes, I'm talking to people who have realized that something wasn't written for them, so they wrote something, or something wasn't, there were no theatre roles for them, so they wrote one and acted in it, which is kind of what we have to do a lot of the time, is make our own work. But there is also a lot of unpaid labor and thought that goes into that. You've sort of done a lot of your own work. Even starting Raspberry Ripple is sort of starting something because there was nothing there for you. Yeah, I just wanted to get your comments on sort of the invisible labor involved in all this.
That is a really complex thing, because the theatre scene, for example, the indie theatre scene in Australia requires people to work for nothing often. And so non-disabled people also do unpaid labour. So it's a very difficult kind of thing. But I would say that the advocacy work that we've got to do is always there. It's always there. But we've got to do it ourselves to get our own access needs met, because there is no one size fits all, right? You've got particular needs and I've got particular needs, and I've got to make sure those needs are going to be met. And I might change my mind about this, but it comes back to the thing that we're all different, to me. And being able to have, conversations about the work and about the making of the work and the dramaturgy and the gift that disability adds to theatre. For example, I had a conversation with somebody recently about the fact that Bell Shakespeare recently did a production of King Lear. There is a role in that play. There's a princess called Cordelia. There were 3 princesses, actually. She's got 2 sisters, Regan and Goneril. The role of Cordelia is figural in that play. And it's a play about power. So if they used a disabled actor in the role of Cordelia, what would the rehearsal room be like? What would Cordelia's relationship with her 2 sisters be? What would her relationship with her father, the king, be? These questions are really, really interesting to me. I would love to do a production of that play, but it would require a whole lot of money, lots of money. And we get the scraps off the end of the table, disabled artists. We aren't funded very well. So, the money needs to be sorted out as well, I think.
That may lead me into a question that I wanted to ask, which is that you can be as political or not as you want with this answer, but what could be done more on a state or a federal level, I guess, to change and improve inclusive storytelling?
Inclusive storytelling could be funded really well, really well. I mean, it takes a lot more than $20,000 to put on a really good show. If you look at the budgets that companies like Sydney Theatre Company and Melbourne Theatre Company have per show, we're looking at something in the region of $100,000, I would have thought. I mean, I'm making that up. I haven't seen their budgets. But you go and see a show at either of those companies and you see a professional costume designer has been paid. The costumes have been made. There are a bunch of people assigned to do that job alone. There is a sound designer. There is a lighting designer. There is a director. There is however many actors are needed to play the roles. And they all have a weekly salary. It's a thing. Money is a thing. And without it, we can't do anything.
What's next for you? I know that you're getting a service dog, but what's next for you in this space?
Interesting question. I am going through a thing where I've achieved some notoriety by performing Cost of Living last year, but it hasn't led to anybody offering me work. That has not happened. So I'm going, what does that mean? Is that because everybody in the theatre world, the mainstream theatre world, believes that I can only play a role written for a person in a wheelchair with a disability? Or is there another reason? Or is it just because people don't work that often in the industry? That's the truth too. That happens. I don't know. So I would say I've got something coming up later in the year. There's a show I do with Raspberry Ripple called Risky Business, and I've sold that to a council in Melbourne, and we're going to be doing the show for them. And it's a show which is part panel and part performance. I get 3 disabled performers together, and they also make up the panel. And the panel is facilitated by a disabled person as well. And we sit around and we talk about what needs to happen within the arts. And each of them gets up and performs for 10 minutes, about 10 minutes in the show. And then everybody goes home. There's a Q&A at the end of it, so the audience can ask any question that pops up for them. And it's a really interesting thing because we get an exchange happening between non-disabled people and disabled people. And that, I think, is really, really necessary. And I should really say disabled artists and non-disabled audience members get to speak to one another.
Which is a bigger deal than it seems, as we were talking about before. A lot of it seems very segregated.
It is, yeah.
I was in a play last year written by Kat Duncan, and I could have put money on the people that were there being there. I was saddened by the fact that it didn't get more of a mainstream look.
I hate that. I really hate it. You know, we need to get audiences of non-disabled people in to see our work. We need to work out how to do it. I've taken myself to them in a way. I'm very lucky because I was non-disabled until I was in my 40s. And so I went to drama school and I got known in the industry. I had done musical theatre, for example, and I had done, audio books, and I had done voiceover work, and I could get into those studios, but all of that stopped for me because suddenly I didn't have access. My career as a voiceover artist came to a crashing end when I could no longer walk upstairs to get into a studio. There's all that stuff. And people are really okay with it, which is amazing to me.
It seems to me that there's a huge diffusion of responsibility.
Absolutely. It's kind of like we've got to pull them along as if they've got a nose ring or something and say to them, look at this and now look at that and imagine how it would be for you. I was talking to somebody just this morning, actually, about the fact that disability is not included on the list of diversities. So we have, institutions which are about diversity, and they've got the word diversity in their title, but they don't include disability. It means BIPOC. It means Aboriginality. It'll include things, but not disability. And I find that disgraceful.
The cynical part of me thinks diversity is sometimes just used as a word to tick a box.
Absolutely. Diversity and inclusion are words which I rarely use these days. I use diversity and disability quite a lot because I don't accept that if I use the word diversity, disability is going to be included. It isn't.
So if somebody is listening to this who is an audience member that loves theatre or performance and wants to support inclusive theatre making, what's something that they could do?
Make sure their access needs are met. Make sure they're met. Absolutely. But also make sure that they're going into an accessible space. It's incredible to me, but it's true that the Arts Centre in Melbourne is not a completely accessible space. I've been given a wheelchair spot for a festival that was on there, and I could only see half of the stage from that wheelchair spot. But I paid the same amount of money as everybody else. That kind of thing is untenable for me.
And quite often it seems like you have to pay more because you have to call up. They have a fee for talking to you on the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
I should be shocked by that. I'm not, sadly. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about me.
Well, it just says that you're used to it. That's all. And you shouldn't be used to it. None of us should be used to it. I have friends who are non-disabled and they put on shows, and I had a friend come down to Melbourne and do his one-man show down there, and he chose a venue which was not accessible for me. And I said to him, well, it's not a show I can come to. So he researched it and wanted to find a space that was accessible for me. Couldn't find one that he could afford. So access needs to be funded by the Australia Council, or Creative Australia it's called now, and by Creative Victoria. All funding bodies need to have access in their mind when it comes to making inclusive work.
Just as a final question, I'd love to know, because we've talked a lot about making the world more inclusive, but what is your more specific vision in terms of what you would love your legacy, I guess, in this work to be?
Oh, I guess I'd love to be remembered as the person who used the word normal to apply to people with disabilities, and that word was taken up. It's normal for the human condition to include us, and it's normal for work to be made about that human condition. You know, it's normal for people to hear our stories and to appreciate them. That's what I would like to be remembered for, and to be remembered as the person who made it easier for the next generation of disabled artists. That's what I would love.
If somebody's listening now and they want to support inclusive theatre or actors with a disability, is there somebody coming up, I guess, in the next generation that you think is a standout performer?
Look, absolutely. I would say Dan Dorr is much younger than me. He's a person who's, I think, in his 30s. He lives in Manchester. Over there, people are more advanced in the arts. And he's done his one-man show all over Europe. It's just a normal part of things. And people who are non-disabled go and see that show. And it's reviewed and it's considered to be critiqued by reviewers in the industry. That's what I want to see. I want to see a world where disability is just a part of things, not special, just a part of things.
Is there a model over in England or in the more advanced countries that you can pinpoint that we can follow? Is it just a matter of time?
Well, I think both, actually, because I know that there is a company called Grey Eye, for example, in London, which is run by a deaf theatre maker called Jenny Seeley. And she only uses disabled artists, only disabled artists. And she does work which is in the mainstream, plays like The House of Bernarda Alba, for example, or Shakespeare or Chekhov or whatever, modern plays as well. She makes work. And there's also Julie McNamara is one of the leading workers in theatre in the UK. and we need to communicate with them. But there's a drama school called RADA in London as well, and they've got a course designed particularly for students with a learning disability. And you see those students have become actors, and you see them on television. Call the Midwife, disabled actors in Vera, or in things like The Accident, which is a series that was written by Jack Thorne, for example. So, the thinking is more advanced over there than we have, I think.
I want to thank you so much for your time, Kate, and for all the work that you do for helping performers, of which I would count myself as an up-and-coming one. Thank you so much for all your work, and thanks for your time today.
That's a pleasure, and thank you for doing this series of podcasts. It's really important. I really appreciate being invited onto your show. I really appreciate that.
And please send me photos of your dog.
Yeah, oh, yes, I will do.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you. See ya.
Thank you to Kate Hood. Create and Amplify is supported by the Australian Government through Creative Australia, its principal arts and investment advisory body. Until next time.